Hi guys, welcome or welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. It is so greatly appreciated. It truly, truly is. So, we are going back down the Reddit rabbit hole again today with a new story time, The Worst 12 Hours of My Life. I have not read this story time. I have no idea what it's about. Going to be, but there is a warning in the beginning of it for SA, R word, and drugs. So just take that into account before deciding to go forward. I have not read this, so I'm going into this completely blind with you guys right now for the first time. So let's get started. I've been meaning to post this here for a while. Wrote my first draft back in April, so it's taken a long time and a lot of therapy for me to be able to think about this experience. I've noticed how many people's stories take place over weeks, months, even years. So I'm here to tell you mine. 12 hours of my life. I managed to block out a lot of memories surrounding this night. But earlier this year, I was mugged and my PTSD returned, as did a lot of the missing memories of those 12 hours. This is the first time I'm telling anyone the full story of what happened to me. I haven't told my partner, my therapist, my parents. No one knows the details. If there's anything that should be taken away from my story, it's this. Remember that you don't need to be polite to everyone you meet. The setting. In October 2018, I was age 18 in my first year at university in a big city in the UK. I had always lived in the countryside before this, so was never very street smart. About a year before I went to university, I started a relationship with this guy, Jimmy, now my ex. It was my first real relationship, and I thought the world of him. But it was not reciprocated in a loving and compassionate way. Jimmy started off as very emotionally abusive and got progressively worse, but that's a whole nother story. At this point, Jimmy and I had been together just under a year and had applied to universities in the same city, mostly by coincidence, and both moved to the same city. I wanted to have a proper student life, so got accommodations in a student block on the other side of the city to him. Jimmy had been using drugs for quite a while, initially starting off just smoking weed. But this progressed rapidly, and by the time we were at university, he was regularly doing a lot of hardcore ones, plus smoking multiple times a day. Honestly, I don't think he was ever not high. When we moved to university, we still saw each other every couple of days, and he found a regular dealer, Mark, that he had been using continuously since we got there in September. Jimmy used to buy from Mark multiple times a week. So, on a handful of occasions, I briefly met him. Mark lived a lot closer to my student accommodation than to Jimmy's, so a couple of weeks before all of this happened, Jimmy started picking up the stuff from Mark when he came to see me. Meaning, Mark would often be outside of my accommodations. Jimmy asked me a few times if I would pick up the stuff he bought from Mark, but I had always felt weird, speaking to Mark on my own. Plus, I rarely smoked weed, so I felt weird picking up in general. 6 p.m. One day at the end of October, Jimmy had plans to come see me that evening and asked me again if I would pick up some weed from Jimmy. If I would pick up some weed from Mark. I was in a good mood that day and feeling more confident than usual. So, for the first time, I agreed. Jimmy gave me Mark's number and said that Mark would message me when he was on his way. Only around 10 minutes later, I got a message from Mark saying that he was nearly outside my apartment and that I needed to go outside. So I did. Outside of my accommodation, there was a quieter area with a lot of benches. So I sat and waited for him. Behind me was only a wall and a small contained area that had a lot of bins for the building. Out of nowhere, I felt someone's hands on my shoulders in a really weird, creepy way. I jumped, obviously, and realized it was Mark, who I barely recognized, as I had only briefly seen him a couple of times. I realized now that my back had been to the wall in the bin storage, so he must have been waiting there. I was immediately on guard because of how he touched my shoulder, especially because I didn't know him, so shifted away from him as he sat down next to me. He began talking to me as if we were buddies, asking me 1,000,001 questions about myself, like deeply personal questions. The whole time I was deflecting, not wanting to give any information, so started asking him questions instead. He began a really deep monologue about himself and his life, where he openly told me that he had just gotten out of prison a few months before for armed something, some kind of crime. I engaged his ramblings, just nodding along, but still trying to get back to the whole point of just picking up the stuff for my boyfriend. 7 p.m. I have always been able to talk to anyone and was always taught to be nice when someone is talking. So I ended up sitting there for around an hour trying to get the conversation back to the reason I was there. Pick up the stuff for my boyfriend and go. It was so long it actually started getting dark. This guy just kept talking. I knew my boyfriend was going to be coming over soon, so I kept looking at my phone to see if he was on his way, but he hadn't replied. Eventually, I told Mark that I needed to get back inside as I was meeting up with my boyfriend soon and then going clubbing after with some friends. So I needed to get ready. And could I please just pick up the stuff? He then said, okay, well, I can't give them to you here because there's CCTV everywhere. We can just go inside so that I could give them to you. I had witnessed him giving my boyfriend stuff in this same spot countless times before, so I knew that this was bullshit. I didn't want Mark to come back to my apartment, so I told him that he could go into the lobby of my building where there was a disabled bathroom and he could give it to me in there. He agreed and followed me inside. We went into the bathroom. It was a very large room, so I didn't have to be too close to him. And he locked the door behind us. He then began fiddling with something in his pocket. I assumed it was the stuff, but instead pulled down his trousers fully and started peeing in the toilet. I was hugely freaked out. This guy just presented his dick to me and began peeing, but I rationalized it that there was no other way that he had any sexual motive because he had met me and my boyfriend together. Not that that matters, because it doesn't matter. So he knew that I was in a relationship. I figured he just really needed to pee. I had kept my eyes shut the whole time, and when he flushed, I thought that he finally would give me the stuff that I was there to collect. This whole thing had been going on for about an hour and a half by this point. This should have been like a 5-minute thing, for real. He said, I really want to roll myself joint, but there's no space in here to do it. Can I come and roll it on your desk, and then I'll give you Jimmy's stuff? I asked again if he could just give me the stuff now, and he said no, saying that I was being rude for not inviting him in. By this point, I was wanting to get ready to go out with friends later that evening and knew my boyfriend would be coming by any minute. So, figured it'd be okay, even though I didn't want this. It's not okay. No, you should have just stuck to your guns. Truthfully. Should have just stuck to your guns. You should have just said, you know what? When Jimmy comes by, I will tell him to get in touch with you and you can give it to him, and that should have been the end of it. And if your boyfriend gave you shit for it after you told him this, what has happened thus far, well, then you know what? Then you need to give him the boot as well. That's just my opinion. I'm sticking to it. It's worth noting that I was emotionally abused by my boyfriend and knew he would be mad at me if I didn't collect the stuff or if I annoyed Mark because it was his favorite dealer. Here we go. I honestly figured that Mark was harmless, despite him telling me that he was a criminal. Fuck my life. and just assured myself that he was only a bit creepy and that it would be fine. Did you? A bit creepy though, really? 8 p.m. Reluctantly, I took Mark up to my apartment, opened the door, and let him in. I said he had to roll his joint fast because I had to get ready. Finally, he gave me the stuff that my boyfriend wanted, so I felt better at that point. He walked over to my desk, moved all of my things to the side, and sat down, getting out the stuff to roll his joint. I can't roll a joint, but I've seen Jimmy do it countless times, so I know it doesn't take more than a minute or so. Mark keeps trying to talk to me, but at this point, my answers are getting shorter and shorter. He rolls his joint so slowly, I cannot even describe it. He then says, "Well, I can't smoke this outside, so is it cool if I just stay here and smoke it? It'll only take 5 minutes to smoke." I said no. I told him again that I had to get ready. He replied, "It's okay. You can get ready with me here." By this point, I was over it. I messaged my boyfriend again to tell him to hurry up. Mark asked me again, and in my frustration and wanting this guy out of my apartment, I just said, "Okay, sure, but be quick." I then went out of my room into the shared kitchen. I had 2 other flatmates, and no one else was in the apartment that night. Grabbed some wine in a glass so that I could have some solitary pre-drinks and returned to my room. I sat for another 15 minutes being increasingly less polite, but he kept talking to me. I drank my first glass of wine pretty fast and just decided if Mark was going to take ages, then I would just get ready to go out with my friends. I told him as soon as he was finished smoking, he could just leave on his own. So I left him sitting at my desk, took some clothes into the bathroom, and jumped into the shower. 9 p.m. Maybe a minute or so into my shower, I heard some soft footsteps outside the door. And like a scene from a freaking horror movie, I saw the door handle slowly be pushed down. Thank fuck I remembered to lock the door. All of a sudden, Mark began banging on the door. I turned the shower off and just said, hi, through the door. He shouted through the door, asking me to let him in because he needed to pee again. I obviously said no and just got dried and dressed. Thankfully, I took the clothes to the bathroom with me. I obviously said no and just got dried and dressed as fast as I could. By this point, I figured there was no way he was going to leave my apartment until I did. So I did my makeup as fast as I physically could and messaged my friends that I'd be coming to theirs sooner than I had planned. Still hadn't gotten a reply from my boyfriend, so I just told him that I was going out early and not to come over. I got ready to go and told Mark that I was leaving now and he needed to come downstairs with me. He still sat at my desk and ignored what I was saying. He asked if he could stay in my room while I was out because he was tired and wanted a nap. Finally, I was firm with him, and after a lot of convincing, he left with me. I made sure to order an Uber to my friend's place so that he couldn't try and walk with me, and by the time we got outside, my Uber was nearly there. He stood with me, looking over my shoulder at my phone the whole time. Uber arrived, I got into it, and Mark straight up walked around to the other side and got in. I was in disbelief and laughed, then told the Uber driver that I didn't know who this guy was and that he wasn't getting in with me. The Uber driver was not as polite as me and told Mark to get out, so he did. Good for you. I'm thinking it doesn't end there though, right? 10 p.m. I sat there on the way to my friend's house and finally felt calm that I had gotten away from Mark. I called my friend from the Uber and told her what happened. So she said she would come outside of her building to get me with a group of her flatmates. My friend's accommodation was not far from mine and took longer to get to by car than on foot because of the one-way system in the city. But I didn't care at this point. Maybe 10 to 15 minutes later, I arrived and my friend came over to my Uber, then brought me back by her group of friends. She had quite a few people with her, and I suddenly noticed that one of her male flatmates was talking to someone slightly away from the group. I already know where this is going. I already know. I looked over and suddenly realized he was talking to Mark. I guess he was looking at the address when I had the Uber app open earlier. I whispered to my friend and she freaked out and went inside with me straight away. I was super freaked out that this guy wouldn't just leave me alone. He refused to leave my side for the last few hours, and now he followed me to my friend's house. Honestly, I felt much safer now and met a few creeps in my time, so I just decided to get over it by having a nice time with my friend. So we sat in her kitchen having a chat and some drinks. 11 p.m. After a while talking to her, I almost forgot what had happened just an hour ago and was getting increasingly tipsy from the wine. The kitchen door opened and her male flatmate comes inside announcing that he invited a guy in who had given him free weed. You guessed it. Mark walks in. Mark addresses me by name and walks over, putting his hands around my waist from behind. I get pretty confident when I drink, so I had no problem pushing him off of me and announcing to everyone in a jokey way, yeah, this is the guy who's been following me around all evening. I don't know him. Even in this room with all of my friends' flatmates, I still didn't feel safe. He stayed away from me, looking at me for a while from the other side of the kitchen, and I just ignored him. My friend could tell I was uncomfortable, so suggested that we go get a drink in her room. Around 30 minutes after going into her room, the door slams open suddenly, and Mark's standing there. He says, "Oh, I was looking for the bathroom. Can I use yours?" My friend had an in-suite. She tells him to get the F out, and he does. I'm honestly just bored of this guy's constant presence at this point, so we decide to go to the club early. 12, I think she means 12 a.m. She says 12 p.m. She means 12 a.m. We grab our stuff, run past the kitchen door and outside. My friend orders us an Uber and we get in and go to the club. After a while, some of her flatmates join us, but Mark doesn't. Thank fuck. People who had been in the kitchen said that Mark left shortly after he saw me and my friend leave and that there was no sign of him. I just try and enjoy the night, but being a poor student, I can't afford any more drinks at the club. As I begin to sober up, I realize how shaken up and creeped out the whole evening made me, and I don't feel safe. 2 a.m. After only a couple of hours, I decide that I just want to go home and sleep because this whole experience freaked the fuck out of me. I take an Uber back, use my key card to get into my apartment building, go upstairs into my apartment. Why do I have a feeling he's in her apartment? I have a feeling. Started getting ready for bed, put on some pajamas, and started taking off all my makeup. All of a sudden, I hear a loud knock on my door. I had no clue who this was, but since it was still early-ish for a Friday night, I thought my boyfriend maybe finally decided to show up. My door didn't have a peephole, so I walked to the door in my pajamas, unlock it, planning to open it just a tiny bit to see who it was, and then bam. Door flies open so fast that I was pushed backwards into my apartment and then shoved into my room, which was directly across from the front door. In my panic, I froze, then looked up to realize that it was Mark, now standing in my apartment. The realization started to sink in. Mark had just forced his way into my room and I was trapped in here with him. Oh God. He was visibly angry and very high. He locked the door behind him and began rambling about how I was so rude for not inviting him in with my friends, for ignoring him, for not letting him in the Uber, etc. I was terrified, so I ran over to my bed and grabbed my phone. He walked over behind me and began grabbing me, touching me as much as he could, so I shouted at him to get off. He saw my phone in my hand and immediately smiled and told me to open the camera. I was terrified, so I did as he said, and he said he wanted a picture of us together. I did as I was told, took a selfie with him while he posed with his arms around me and then kissing my cheek and my neck. He then screamed at me to unlock my phone, so I did. He made me open up my messages and send Jimmy the selfie of me and Mark next to each other on my bed. So I did. He waited for it to send, then he grabbed my phone and put it down on the desk. I sat at my desk for the next 4 to 5 hours, talking at me, continuously saying how I was so rude. I needed someone to teach me some manners, how I had to do what he said because he was older than me, how Jimmy wasn't good enough for me, how I was so beautiful, and how he knew that I needed to be with him. He told me that his girlfriend knew he had been at my house that evening, and now she said he can't go home, and it was all my fault. The whole time I continued bargaining with him, trying to get him to leave, but it didn't work. Occasionally, I would just lie down on my bed or sit and not speak. Each time I did, he would get up and wrap his arms around me, or try and spoon me, stroking my face, trying to kiss me, and trying to take my clothes off and touch me. Every time I fought him off, he would get angry again and go and sit at the desk and keep shouting. I knew that this guy had previously been in prison for some kind of violent crime, so I did not want to piss him off. I just sat there for hours and quietly sobbed, too scared to try and leave because I would have had to walk past him to get to the door. I was out of options. I didn't know if I could get out without angering him. Couldn't call the police because he had my phone. My flatmates were at home, so my screams meant nothing. 6 a.m. While he sat at my desk, he kept smoking more and more weed, or taking a line of whatever. So he was becoming more and more out of it. I was able to speak between his ramblings, so I gently said that I was going to the bathroom. I noticed he had his eyes partially closed and figured I only had one chance. So I took the opportunity and grabbed my phone off the desk as fast as I could, unlocked the door, and ran out of the apartment. The only thing I will always remember is being in tears, pressing the button for the elevator to come probably about 50 times because I was so scared that he was going to come after me. As I got into the elevator, I heard him come out of the apartment, shouting my name. The elevator doors closed as he looked at me. I was able to get downstairs and out of the building. I ran around the corner of the building in my pajamas and manically dialed the number for the police. Told them what happened and that this guy had been in prison until recently, and next thing I knew, around 5 police cars showed up. I was in such a state and called my boyfriend to tell him what happened. He was still awake and hadn't come to visit the night before because he was with a girl who was a friend. So he was cheating on you while you, God knows what could have happened to you while you were getting his stuff. That's what happened, huh? That now he didn't want to come to be with me because he had some weed on him and didn't want to be near the police. I told him to get to my place right now, and he reluctantly did. The aftermath. This aftermath better include that you are no longer with this guy. Okay? That's what this aftermath better include. The police had to force entry to my apartment because Mark had locked himself in it and barricaded the door. They arrested him, and he ended up going to prison for drug charges, but not for what he did or tried to do to me. The police said they couldn't prosecute him because I had willingly let him into my apartment earlier in the night, and he hadn't physically done anything. S.A. an attempted R word, plus holding me hostage in my own apartment, but okay. After I'd given my statements to the police, I went back inside to see that after I escaped my room, it was trashed. Mark had thrown things around and smashed things in anger. I'm so glad I got out when I did because I can't imagine what would have happened if I was trapped in the crossfire. I don't know what happened to Mark after that, but I moved out of that apartment a couple months later. Make sure that Mark could never find me. I actually stayed in my ABOSC relationship for another year or so until I realized that I was too good to put up with Jimmy's shit. I had such I had such severe PTSD from the incident that I couldn't go outside for months afterwards, which messed up my whole first year at university. It's taken until now for me to be able to walk around at night, and being alone in public is still really difficult. I'm well aware that the ending is very anticlimactic, and I wish I'd been able to advocate for myself, but I just shut down emotionally afterwards. I can't get too much into the details of the SA and attempted R word because honestly, thinking about it makes me want to throw up. But I realized I was so lucky to be able to fight him off every time because without a doubt he wanted to hurt me. After this all happened, I started volunteering with people in prison for crimes like SA to try and prevent them from ever reoffending. Good for you. Good for you. I think it is my way of advocating for others because I couldn't advocate for myself. If you take one thing away from this, stop being so polite. I was raised to be nice to everyone, and I realize now that being polite worsened everything. I wish I had never been polite enough to pick up for my ex, or polite enough to let Mark into my apartment when he begged. So, to Mark, fuck you. And please, let's not meet again. All right, guys, if you're still here, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you, and I appreciate you so, so, so very much. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you haven't yet, and you feel so inclined to, because it really helps me out, and I really, really appreciate it. And until next time, stay safe out there.